Hi guys, so the topic for today's video is active and passive transport. Now, first of all, we'll start with what is transport. Transport is the movement of substances like gases, nutrients, water, etc. across the cell membranes. Now, it can either be inside the cell membranes or out of them, right? Now, we do know that cells constantly need nutrients like glucose, amino acids, oxygen, and must remove waste like carbon dioxide or urea. So, how do they do this? Cellular transport is the regulated movement of materials across the plasma membrane essential for cell survival and function. Now, regulated movement does not mean they take unlimited amount of sources like nutrients or gases and just pass them through. It's important that we know that they take like only a small quantity or the required quantity. Okay. Now, why do we need mechanisms for transport? So first of all, cells need to exchange substances with their environment. Now to maintain life processes, take nutrients, which is for photosynthesis, right? And remove waste. It can be for the byproducts of photosynthesis. Now for the leaves, the byproducts will be a waste because they have no further use of those things. Now if there is no transport system, cells can't survive or function. Now the most basic example we can take is of xylem and fluor, right? One of them transports water to and fro from the roots and to the other plants, and the phloem is for the foods, right? Now, the second function for transport, or the important thing we require transport for, is to maintain homeostasis. Homeostasis is the ability of the organism or the cell to maintain a stable internal environment, right? Now, you can just think of it as the body's balancing act to keep everything just right, like the temperature, water, or sugar levels, etc. Now, if we take some examples, the first example would be I've taken for both body and the cell. For body, constant body temperature. Now, we do know that the normal body temperature for us humans is about 37 degrees Celsius. Now, if it gets too hot, we'll sweat it out, right? And if it gets too cold, we shiver to produce heat. So now the next example would be blood sugar regulation. If we eat something and our blood sugar level rises, right? Now, if our blood sugar level has risen, what will happen? Insulin would be released. And what will insulin do? It will store the glucose as glycogen. But if the blood sugar level is low, what would happen? Then glucagon is released. What will glucagon do? It will break down the glycogen that we had stored previously to glucose. Now here there is no condition where either the blood sugar level is just kept as high or as low. The body is doing things to maintain that level, the normal blood sugar level, right? Now, if we take examples of homeostasis in cells, it will prevent swelling or shrinking. We learned it in the previous lesson that osmosis has a condition of isotonic solution, right? So, in isotonic solution, the concentration of both things is equal. If one is too high or one is too low, any of these things could happen. And by homeostasis, cells also do remove waste products. So what can we say? That homeostasis means internal balance. If there is any change in the external environment, our body ability to maintain balance, that is homeostasis. Now the third function would be to exchange material with the environment. We know there are two types of organisms, unicellular organisms and multicellular organisms. The unicellular organisms, they only have one cell, so what they can do, they can just exchange directly with the environment. But the multicellular organisms, they have to rely on blood and tissues. The body, they'll rely on blood and tissues, but an individual cell in a multicellular organism, they still need to transport molecules between each other, right? And now, fourth function is to transport against gradient whenever required. It is not necessary that the transportation is done against gradient all the time, only when there is a requirement or need. Now, we do know transport is of two types, active and passive. First, we'll start with passive transport. Now, here, if we look at the diagram, this is a hill, and the person, say A, he is standing right here, and he has to come down. So, will he have to put energy? Like, just think, will he have to put energy to come down, or will it be very, very easy? Why? Because the slope of the hill is downwards, right? So, all A has to do is just like walk. He can walk freely without putting in any energy. It's easy, it's natural. So same way, passive transport is a simple and natural process. Molecules move along the concentration gradient, that is from high to low. They don't have to put any energy into it. So therefore no ATP is required. Now what are the types of passive transport? Passive transport is of three types: simple diffusion, facilitated diffusion, and osmosis. Now if we start with simple diffusion. Simple diffusion is small non-polar molecules like oxygen, carbon dioxide, alcohol that pass directly through the membrane. Now if you see here, there are two membranes, cell membrane A and cell membrane B. If oxygen has to go from A to B, what it needs to do? Simply it will go along the concentration gradient from high to low, right? Now if we move on to facilitated diffusion. Facilitated diffusion, it uses channel or carrier proteins. Now we'll study this in the chapter cell, but there are certain proteins on the cell membrane that are present. Some are embedded inside the cell membrane and some have one face outwards and another face inside. So glucose and amino acids, they use these carrier proteins, the ones who have their faces outside and inside, to pass through. Okay? And osmosis, we studied movement of water across semi-permeable membrane, high water potential to low water potential, example root cells absorbing water. Now here we do have to see this point that in pure water, water potential and water concentration are same because there is no solute added in. But water potential and water concentration, they both have completely different meanings. Water potential is the ability of water to move, and it is affected by solute and pressure, right? And water concentration is the amount of water molecules in a solution affected by the solute amount. Okay? Now, if we just look here, we take two tanks. There is tank A and here is tank B, right? Now tank A has pure water and tank B has salty water. So pure water is high water potential because there is no solute added, right? Solute is absent. But if we take tank B into consideration, it has low water potential with respect to tank A because it has a solute added in it, which is salt. So water potential, if we took into account, we also took into account the solute presence and the pressure is from high to low. So high water concentration, low water concentration, and low water potential here in tank B because the solute is also present and it is associated with water. Okay. So to balance out the water potential, the water will move from tank A to tank B. So next time you see water moving across a membrane, remember it always flows from where it's free to where it's required. That's water potential in action. it is very important to know what the difference between water potential and water concentration is, because it is very easy to get confused about it. Now, to know more about the carrier proteins we studied about previously, the carrier proteins are embedded in the membrane. So this is the cell membrane we have, and there are some proteins which are like embedded directly into the cell membrane and they don't have a face outside or inside. But there is some proteins that have a face on the outside and on the inside. Now, what do these proteins do? They act like a door that opens and closes after grabbing correct molecule. Now, this picture here, it shows very clearly the carrier protein, it's open, the face. It requires a nitrate ion, so it will take it and just put it inside the cell like this, okay, by changing its shape. Now, without carrier proteins, your cells would struggle to get nutrients in. They are the smart gates of the membrane. So, to end the passive transport topic, the main key points would be no ATP required because it is going along the concentration gradient and does not require any energy. And it can occur via simple facilitated diffusion or osmosis in case of water. And no carrier saturation is required in simple diffusion. Simple diffusion is happening just across a membrane, while facilitated diffusion, it requires carrier proteins, right? Now, to start with active transport, we'll take the same example of the hill and A. Now, A has to go up the hill. Do you think it will be as easy as he had it when he had to come downhill? No. He almost had to put no energy into coming down. But when he has to go up, he will have to put energy into it, right? So here he is moving against the concentration gradient, against the odds, right? So active transport is movement of molecules against concentration gradient, that is low to high. So yes, it will be a very energy consuming process. So in active transport we use carrier proteins. Now what will be the mechanism of carrier proteins? Carrier proteins bind to molecules like here, nitrate and glucose. They use ATP and change the protein shape. Before they had their shape like this. To eject the molecule into the cell membrane, they change their shape from this to this, right? And the molecule is pushed across the membrane. Now, what are the types of active transport? There is primary active transport and secondary active transport. Primary active transport directly uses the ATP, like sodium-potassium pump, whereas secondary active transport uses ATP indirectly. It uses energy from another gradient, that is co-transport. For example, glucose and sodium co-transport. Now, we don't have to go into detail about this. We just have to know the definition and the overall things like that. Now, when you study about it, like the topic required in what chapter, there you will learn it in detail if it is required. Okay. Now, key features of active transport. Active transport uses ATP because it is going against the gradient, low to high. It involves the use of carrier proteins. We already studied about it, even in facilitated diffusion. And carrier saturations can occur. Now, difference between active and passive transport, you can just look at the table here. And NEET level examples for active and passive transport. This is very important. Passive transport, oxygen and carbon dioxide in alveoli, air sacs of the lungs, water in plant roots, which occurs by osmosis. Active transport is sodium-potassium pump in the neurons and glucose absorption in small intestine or the proton pump in mitochondria. Now to recap. Passive, high to low, no energy because along the concentration gradient. 3 types: diffusion, facilitated diffusion and osmosis. Facilitated diffusion uses carrier proteins. Active, low to high, requires energy because it is going against the concentration gradient. And active is of 2 types, primary and secondary. Primary will use energy directly, and secondary will use it as co-transport. And both the active and passive processes are essential for homeostasis. Thank you and hope you like the video. Put so much efforts into making them, and if you do need these chapter or lecture slides, you can just ask in the comments. I'll share the link.